our consumption. So tell me, you've been at this as long as I have. Tell me, why has the truth not become widespread? Why are the liars, cheaters, and polluters still out there doing what they should be doing?
Well, they have their own platforms.
Nope, I don't much like liars and cheaters either, and bad information to pollute my mind. I'm absolutely positively claiming copyright, fair use for the purpose of criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and looking at the research. I'm not out to make a profit, but to share information which is called educational. I want to look at the veganism platform in regard to diabetes. I'm using longer clips to show that I'm not cherry picking information. And then I'll dissect it bit by bit. There's big claims made in these videos, and so I want to follow the trail. They're making these claims. I'm listening to a lecture. I'm going back to the studies. What do the studies show? This is all a lesson in discernment. I've never been a vegan, never plan on being a vegan. I wasn't even paying that much attention to it, except one thing came up on my radar, and that is I have something in common, and that is malnutrition. And mine is not caused from a, quote, eating disorder, except that I've had underlying endocrine disorders. But this is a red flag for anybody into the vegan thing, and I, feel free to share in any way you want to, because this is really, really important information for every living soul.
Our consumption. So tell me, you've been at this as long as I have. Tell me, why has the truth not become widespread? Why are the liars, cheaters, and polluters still out there doing what they should be doing?
Well, they have their own platforms. It's not that we don't get a good message out there. It can be dwarfed by other messages, though. For example, it was back 15 years ago when the National Institutes of Health gave our research team a grant to do a head-to-head test for people with type 2 diabetes of a conventional diabetes diet versus a completely plant-based diabetes diet. And as you know, the plant-based diet just was dramatically better. It led to a 3 times better improvement in blood sugar control. It led to weight loss without counting calories. It really became the standard. And not only was it funded by the federal government, the first results were published by the American Diabetes Association in their journal Diabetes Care. We presented it at the American Diabetes Association and everywhere. So it's not that the word didn't get out there. I have a book on it. We did a PBS special that has been viewed thousands and thousands and thousands of times at stations all over the place. However, as you know, probably better than anybody, there are other forces that are trying to get other messages out there. It was back 15 years ago when the National Institutes of Health gave our research team a grant to do a head-to-head test for people with type 2 diabetes of a conventional diabetes diet versus a completely plant-based diabetes diet. And as you know, the plant-based diet just was dramatically better.
Dear Dr. Barnard, you're making some pretty lofty claims there. So let's follow the trail. We'll go back next and look at you do a lecture from 2016, and you're quoting your study, I believe, from 2006. So let's follow your lead.
Tested a vegan diet versus what we call ADA guidelines. That's the American Diabetes Association. And what that means is lower your calories, don't eat too much carbohydrate, a more traditional diabetes diet. And what we track when people have diabetes is something called hemoglobin A1C. And hemoglobin A1C is just a way of measuring your glucose control. If I measure blood glucose directly, it varies during the day. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. But hemoglobin A1C stays more stable. It reflects blood glucose control for a period of about 3 months. And it should be below 7. And our patients were not below 7. They were all around 8 to start. And the people on the conventional diet, they improved. They did better from 7.9 to 7.5. That's good. But the people on the vegan diet had a drop from 8.1 down to 6.8. That's enormous. That's better than any of the oral medicines that we use for diabetes. If you have a medicine that does that, that is a fantastic medicine. So we also tracked LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and it drops dramatically. It drops very, very well because you're not eating cholesterol. You're not eating animal fat. Tested a vegan diet versus what we call ADA guidelines. That's the American Diabetes Association. And what that means is lower your calories, don't eat too much carbohydrate, a more traditional.
Dr. Barnard, I have no argument with that whatsoever, that the ADA diet is essentially no different than a typical American diet, loaded with carbs, 3 squares a day, and throw in a couple snacks. So your competition is not very stiff.
When people have diabetes is something called hemoglobin A1C. And hemoglobin A1C is just a way of measuring your glucose control. If I measure blood glucose directly, it varies during the day. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. But hemoglobin A1C stays more stable. It reflects blood glucose control for a period of about 3 months. And it should be below 7.
You set the bar there pretty low, Dr. Barnard, at a 7. 6.5 is the beginning range of diabetes. I think my goal would be 5.6 or better. I don't want to be a diabetic. I don't even want to be a pre-diabetic. Of course, you didn't pull the number 7 completely out of thin air. Let's see where it came from. It's the goal of therapy recommended by the ADA. And this is what else they have to say. Target goals of less than 7 may be beneficial in patients such as those with short duration of diabetes, long life expectancy, etc. However, in patients with significant complications of diabetes, targeting less than 7 may not be appropriate. Okay, let's just start chopping that leg off, starting with the toes. I want to be the person below 5.7, okay?
Below 7. And our patients were not below 7. They were all around 8 to start. And the people on the conventional diet, they improved. They did better from 7.9 to 7.5. That's good. But the people on the vegan diet had a drop from 8.1 down to 6.8. That's enormous. That's better than any of the oral medicines that we use for diabetes. If you have a medicine that does that, that is a fantastic medicine.
Okay, Dr. Barnard, that would really be some fantastic medicine, huh? Well, let's look a little closer at your chart here. And it states individuals with no medication changes. Okay, so they're taking diabetic drugs to achieve a 6.8, which is still diabetic. Let's dig a little deeper. Let's actually look at the study you're referring to. we could glean a little more information on where you're pulling these numbers from. The previous slide shows the title of the study that he was involved with 15 years ago, and that he's touting, in his presentation here. And this slide shows the entire body of the study. So let's see what is said in the actual results. The underlined part states 43% of the vegan group and 26% of the ADA group participants reduce their diabetes medication. Okay, so those will be eliminated off of his slide. And including all participants, the A1C decreased by 1 point in round figures in the vegan group and a half a point in the ADA group. Now here's where his slide comes in, and he's saying how great the results are, but okay, listen up, folks. Excluding those who change medications. Okay, these people are taking diabetic medications, whether it be insulin or metformin or glucophage or all of the above. We don't know. Okay, excluding those, the A1C fell 1.23 points in the vegan group. That's where he's getting his numbers, folks. And 0.38 in the ADA group. What a fantastic diet. And he's saying how great it would be, if a drug could do it. Well, they are taking the drugs, dear Dr. Barnard. Come on. And also highlighted, I'll show you the slide, but among those who did not change lipid-lowering medications. Okay, so this slide will show they're taking lipid medications. They're taking a statin or some such thing. And then this is how how he describes in his presentation how their LDL cholesterol fell and how much better it was than how much it fell in the ADA group. Folks, a person has got to be discerning to listen to stuff like this. Yikes.
Any of the oral medicines that we use for diabetes. If you have a medicine that does that, that is a fantastic medicine. You have your ham sandwich with mayo and cheese on it, and particles of fat get into the bloodstream, and those particles of fat enter the muscle cells and the liver cells. And when the cells fill up with fat, they make insulin unable to signal effectively. It can't get the sugar out of the blood into the cell because the cell's filled with fat particles. So you go on the McDougall diet or a plant-based diet that's also low in fat. And what happens? The fat starts dissipating from the cells. We call it intramyocellular lipid, but it's dissipating. And then insulin can start working again. And you can be 15 years old. You can be very thin. But if you have that fat inside your cell, you're going to develop diabetes in many cases. And now we know that. It makes old diabetes diets look ridiculous. Don't eat bread, don't eat rice, don't eat potatoes. That has nothing to do with it. All that will do is reduce the glucose, but that was never the problem. The problem is inside the cell. We have to get away from the animal fat completely, keep the oils low, be on a healthy plant-based diet.
Okay, Dr. Barnard, what are you talking about, this intramyocellular lipid content? I'm never going to pretend to be an expert, but you know what? I have a vested interest. So I looked at this study here, and to be honest with you, it vacillated so all over the place, it was enough to make my head spin. And they're comparing diabetics, overweight men, and highly trained endurance athletes in this study. And they are saying, and highlighted here, trained endurance athletes are markedly insulin sensitive. Okay, so they're athletes, they're utilizing their insulin correctly compared compared to someone who's insulin resistant. Okay. And they had elevated mixed muscle lipid content. They get into details that it was even higher than type 2 diabetics in an athlete in their type 1 muscles, and pretty much the same in across the board in the type 2 muscles. So this is, over the, in some ways over my head. But, I could get the drift of what they're saying, at least a little bit. And they're calling it a metabolic paradox. This study's quite long, but I want to point out a couple things I saw in a part of the body of this study. And they're saying there's ample evidence to support that elevated fat in the muscles and or age-related decline in the mitochondrial function are associated with this fat storage. Okay, now I'm really getting scared. My mitochondrial function is not working correctly. So they go on to state, so they speculate that the storage mechanism and the characteristic and distribution pattern of the groups is behaving differently. Okay, so my imagination is running wild with, I have got this rancid fat in my cells. That's how the imagination works. What can I do about it, though? Come on. It's a good thing I read to the end of the study because I could breathe again. Okay, the first point they make is that highly trained, insulin-sensitive athletes have a higher fat content in their muscles than do type 2 diabetics. And here's where I could breathe again. There was no aggregate size and or distribution patterns between the groups in the intramyocellular lipid content. And they go on to say we should be more careful when assuming elevated fat deposits to represent a risk factor for the development of skeletal muscle insulin resistance and or type 2 diabetes. Okay, so let's put our thinking cap on because this is not like proven science. Let's apply Occam's razor to this. No more things should be presumed to exist than are absolutely necessary. Now those are words of wisdom. Okay, so maybe I could presume that my muscles are insulin resistant, and maybe that's affecting how my mitochondria is behaving or misbehaving. And maybe I have fat stores in my cells that are not utilized because of the insulin resistance. So let's see, the body has two choices: burn glucose or fat. So how in the world could I get my body to burn that fat in my cells? Well, remove the glucose and help reverse that insulin resistance. I want that mitochondrial working if that is an issue, and I want to energize my cells.
It starts burning sugar. After it burns the sugars, your sugars come down. You don't have to take medications. You don't have to take insulin. After that, it starts burning fat. And that's perfect. That's exactly what.
Why are the liars, cheaters, and polluters still out there doing what they should be doing?
The standard, and not only was it funded by the federal government, the first results were published by the American Diabetes Association. As you know, the plant-based diet just not only was it funded by the federal government, Not only was it funded by the federal government, I have a book on it. It was back 15 years ago when the National Institutes of Health gave our research team a grant. It was back 15 years ago when the National Institutes of Health gave our research team a grant. There are other forces that are trying to get other messages out there. However, as you know, probably better than anybody, there are other forces that are trying to get other messages out there.
It starts burning sugar. After it burns the sugars, your sugars come down. You don't have to take medications. You don't have to take insulin. After that, it starts burning fat. And that's perfect. That's exactly what is that. You start off with one medication, then you take two medications, then three, then you take insulin, then more insulin, and more insulin. And after 10 years, you started with one medication, now you're on 100 units of insulin a day. Well, you're taking more medication to do the same job, to keep that blood sugar the same. That means your diabetes is worse. Even if your blood sugar is better, your diabetes is worse than it's ever been. Because you've never actually done anything about treating the insulin resistance. So that patient who went and lost weight and exercised and cut out the carbs and cut out the sugars, they actually reversed their insulin resistance, and therefore their sugars came down, which is far different than making your blood sugars go down by force, by medication, and ignoring the actual disease. So that's the fundamental mistake that we've made over this last 20, 30, 40 years, right? We've treated the disease of type 2 diabetes, which is too much insulin, as if it was type 1 diabetes, which is too little insulin. So you got to understand that type 1 diabetes has too little insulin. So that makes sense. You should give them insulin. Type 2 diabetes is too much insulin. You need to reduce their insulin. But instead, we're giving more insulin to a disease state that has too much insulin. Well, of course that's not going to work. That's crazy.
You had another.
So that patient who went and lost weight and exercised and cut out the carbs and cut out the sugars, they actually reversed their insulin resistance. Cut out the carbs and cut out the sugars. They actually reversed their insulin resistance. But instead, we're giving more insulin to a disease state that has too much insulin. Well, of course that's not going to work. That's crazy.
You had another.
I find it hard to take.